Hello everybody and welcome to episode 4 of Just Branding. I'm Matt Davies and I'm here with Jacob Cass, and today we are going to be talking to you about how to sell strategy. Say hello, Jacob.
Hello.
Okay, so it's an interesting topic because obviously so far we've talked a little bit about some of the our various journeys into strategy from a professional perspective and what that meant from a client and why we think there's a lot of value in doing strategy from a brand perspective. And we've talked a little bit about some of the tools and some of the cool things that a designer can use after a bit of strategy work has been done and how that can help them create more meaningful work. But today, really, we want to kind of put some commercial backing to what we're saying, because I think it's all, it's all great, but if you're in terms of making money as a designer, but suddenly if you hear of this new thing about strategy, I guess one of the questions is, well, can I make any money from it? And can that put food on the table? And even though it might add value to the clients, really is there much in it for me? I guess is a kind of a question we might ask ourselves. So I guess first of all, Jacob, let me ask you, in terms of your journey and in terms of your approach to sales, as you transition into more of a strategic space and as you're on that journey, how has it kind of panned out? Like, how has it changed your approach to sales? Tell us a bit about that journey and what your thoughts are on that.
For sure. So I'm just going to take it back a little bit, and it's to where you actually find out about the strategy. And once you learn about strategy, you need to really explore all the avenues of what it is, because there's a lot of fog in the air about what it is. And for me, as soon as I heard about it, I started exploring different courses, books, and started reaching out to different people. So I wanted to understand what it meant to different people and how they facilitated strategy before I could actually go out and sell it, because I didn't know how to sell it because I didn't really know how to facilitate it in the proper way. So I was always doing some form of strategy to help my design work, but it wasn't what I thought strategy was, or what is strategy. So to put that in perspective, I couldn't sell strategy. Well, let's talk about the sales, because before I used to use a questionnaire, and I'd have a questionnaire on my site which would ask the client all the questions. So they just filled in the blanks, and I put a proposal together based on what they filled out in the questionnaire. And yeah, that it worked for a number of years, but it really positioned me as an order taker in some respect, not entirely, but there was no way to build up trust in that way. There was no dialogue back and forth. So that was really the biggest shift for me, is getting rid of that questionnaire and going into a format of creating a relationship with the client. And that was either through a phone call or emails or a video call. And
that's absolutely awesome. Can I come in there just for 1 second? So I also relate to that. Those that have heard the previous episodes will know I used to run an agency, and I remember very distinctly having one of those forms that you talk about, and it literally asked the user to basically select what they wanted. Like, literally, do you want a brochure? Do you want a website? Do you want, what is it? And I guess, like you, as time went on, you realize actually people don't know. And actually doing a little leaflet or something is not really going to solve their problem. Like, there's a much bigger problem behind this. There's more of a strategy required, even just from a marketing perspective, let alone getting into the depths of the brand. So I don't know. I think we automatically gravitate towards that, don't we? Because we kind of want to make life easy for ourselves, so we get an easy brief and then we can execute against it. But really, it shouldn't be about us. It should be about the customer. It should be about the client. And in my journey, what happened with me was in my agency, I employed a guy who used to work for E.ON, who were a big energy company here in the UK. And he was one of my account managers, and he said to me, one of the problems we used to face was when we used to get a brief submitted from this form, we would actually, we'd do a bit of sales, do a proposal, get it back, and then we'd start executing against it. And we'd think we'd fulfilled the brief, and we'd send it to the client, but the client would, for some reason, not be happy with it, and then it would come back with edits. And I'm sure most designers have come across this scenario where we're back and forth, and it drives clients nuts because they're like, why don't they just understand what I need? And it drives designers crazy because they're like, well, hang on, we've done what you've said. And in the end, the project everyone gets a bit bitter about it, and everyone just can't be bothered with it. Let's be honest, that's what happens. So anyway, my colleague who I'd employed, he said to me, Matt, why don't we do some workshops, like a kickoff workshop? So it wasn't called a workshop then. I think we just called it like a kickoff meeting or something. So I was like, yeah, all right, Paul, off you go. Do yourself a workshop. If you think that will solve the problem, because it kept happening on his accounts, which wasn't his fault. It just was, that was it. Anyway, so I said, do you mind if I sit in while you do this? So he said, yeah. And so he brought designers in, he brought me in as the creative director at the time. He was there. And then the client brought various people from their side. And what we found was just doing that from a briefing perspective, we got so much insight that it was super helpful in terms of this back and forth. And then what that led to was us actually taking control more of those meetings and shaping them into, I guess, what I now do as a sort of a strategy workshop I can do them over a week with leadership teams. But, initially the smallest one would be an afternoon where you'd sort of sit down and really talk about why the company exists and who it exists to serve. So I also shifted in terms of that, and completely hear what you're saying. We sort of abandoned the form after a while, and yeah, it's more about a conversation. And the way I do sales now is massively different to way back when. Anyway, I kind of cut across you very rudely. Do you want to keep going with your story, and then maybe I'll cut across you again in a minute?
I'm used to it. Don't worry.
Yeah, the abuse I get on this podcast, unbelievable.
Well, after the questionnaire, so I scrapped the questionnaire. It did work for a long time, but yeah, I was experimenting with different ways to go through the sales process, and I went through two different methods. And one was I received an email, and then I scheduled a call, and it was generally about a 30-minute call, and I got a kind of discovery period, if you will. And from that information, I put together a proposal that offered them 3 different packages, like an expensive one, a mid-price one, and a budget one, more or less, with a scaled approach. And that works well. But I've also been experimenting with a 15-minute introduction call, and then going into a paid discovery period, which would then lead into proposal. So I've tried both ways, and both work much better than the questionnaire method, because you can establish trust and establish your expertise and show your knowledge about the subject. And that has really worked wonders for me. And the more I've learned about strategy with all those courses and the books that I keep mentioning, the better you can talk about it. And that's how you can sell strategy, is by talking and listening as well, not just proposal or just showing them a piece of paper, because you're not gonna get those big numbers that way, and you're not gonna solve big problems either. You're just going to be doing pretty much order taking. So that's really what's worked.
Here we go again. I was just going to say on the numbers. Yeah, I'm going to cut across you. I was just going to say on the numbers point, you make an interesting point, because if you were to ask yourself, like, why do we get paid, right? Just as a big, hairy question. I think the best answer to that I've come across is we get paid by adding value, right? So you get paid as much as the other person perceives your value to be. Now, if you position yourself as a commodity-based kind of designer, then you're going to be treated like that, right? But if you position yourself as an expert who can add huge value, very specific to their situation, you can then charge the bigger numbers, like you were saying. So it doesn't surprise me at all that your new approach has kind of opened up new opportunities and new sort of value. The value gap is increased because you're adding more value at the start, understanding the problem much better before then supplying a proposal to answer that. So that's really interesting. Tell me about those, just if you wouldn't mind. Like, tell us about the two approaches. So one is that you get you do the call and then you put a proposal together. What I'm interested in is that next one that you talked about, which was you do the call, you almost sell in very early a discovery process, and you get paid for that, which I think is remarkable. I've never been paid for discovery, at least not that I'm aware of. And then you put your proposal together at that point. Like, that's amazing. Like, talk to me about how that discovery phase kind of works, that the client is paying for.
Yeah, so it's pretty much an investment it's a small investment for them, and they can start to establish that trust with you and start to realize how you're going to benefit the business by improving their brand and their goals and all of that. So we can focus in on all the big questions, and that's what you can't do in a 15-30 minute call before you send a proposal. So that's really what the discovery is all about, and showing that value as you spoke about. And that really gets them to see the big picture, which allows you to sell through the idea of brand strategy and all the extra collateral that's going to come after that, because you can actually start to talk about bigger things like social media and marketing, and not just have the logo and identity as the result. It's actually thinking big, and that's really why this discovery period is so useful. And yeah, I think a lot of the common problems is that is the end result. It's just the identity package. It's nothing else. So I think, yeah, that's the value in it. So where to go from there? Maybe we can give an example of. Well, could you give an example of how you do it in terms of the bigger companies? Because I know you work on retainers sometimes, and you go into larger companies and talk with the leadership team. Like, what is your method of selling strategy to them? I remember you saying that you have a longer form.
Yeah, I mean, so two things come to mind. First of all, what I'm about to say probably sounds like magic dust to some people, because it takes, but really the magic dust is time, right? If that makes sense. So if you look at my social media, if you look at my website, if you look at what my activity, which some people may have started to do if they've come across this crazy bearded guy and talking to Jacob Cass, maybe they have. What you'll notice is that I give a lot away. Like, I don't hide anything back. So I give tips, I give tools. I do at least one blog post a week, which goes out to an email list. I have a lead generation kind of thing on my website, where if you basically put in your contact details, you get a free download, an ebook. But obviously then you're on my kind of emailing list. And so I'm in touch with a lot of people a lot of the time, if that makes sense. Now, that is a huge engine. It takes a lot of effort. You do loads of stuff like that as well, Jacob, I know. But so everything I'm going to say is predicated on the back of doing a lot of work in that area of generating awareness, because that, I think, is your first, the first thing you've got to be aware of. Like, I think a lot of designers think, well, I'm an awesome designer, everyone's going to come to me. And I used to, being honest, have that attitude, like, I don't blow my own trumpet, everyone's just going to come to me. And one day someone said to me, Matt, do you know what? Like, because I used to say, like, I really don't like this kind of arrogant approach of putting myself out there, doing loads of PR and all this stuff. And someone said to me, I think it's the opposite. I don't think you're arrogant if you do that. And I was like, what? And they said, it's arrogant to sit in a room, right, and just expect people to come to you. You have to show your soul to the world. You have to show what's on offer. And if people like it, then they will come to you. If they don't, then you need to change. And so it's kind of weird, because I think definitely, and I don't know what it's like in Australia, but being British, we like to think we're like, all kind of reserved and stuff. So it doesn't come naturally to kind of push out yourself. But if you do not, there is no way people are going to really come to you as a specialist. And so everything else I'm going to say is going to be predicated on the back of that effort in the awareness of me as a brand, of the Matt Davies brand.
Yeah.
You do a lot of that stuff. Do you want to add anything in there just before I
Yeah,
proceed?
there's a common phrase that if you don't toot your own horn, no one else will. So it's so you do have to toot your own horn to be seen, and that's really how you get exposure. And like you said, awareness is part of that funnel. So I do a ton of inbound marketing, and that's really a very broad approach. So I get a lot of awareness, I get a lot of traffic, and I have a lot of content that shows my expertise in this area. And that's really how the relationship starts, is that's all out there, and then they see that expertise, and then they approach you, and you go from there. So that's the higher
trust,
part of trust. And that's the higher part of the funnel that we didn't really talk about before we got into actual questionnaires and stuff.
We can do a session on that maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
We could do a session on that. Because I mean, I know you've been doing it for years. And in fact, just a little sort of trivia side note, the reason why me and Jacob are doing this is because when I ran my agency, we always used to try and look at getting quite high up from an SEO perspective for various search phrases. And the flipping guy who kept beating us all the time, drive me and my team crazy, was this Jacob Cass. And he was just creative, drive me absolutely mental. And so we were like vying one or two some very key spots. And so I came across Jacob years ago from that. He infuriated me back then. He still infuriates me now. But it's better together, right? So we joined up. but yeah, so that, I know you've been doing it for years. I know there's tons probably that you could share on that. Let's move on though, because I think we really want to focus in on the selling bit. So the next thing is that on the awareness front, one of the things that I do is a lot of business talks, and I've found that they are the key for me because I position myself not as a designer, as a consultant, as a brand strategy consultant. In fact, I've now been calling myself a brand and culture strategy consultant, and I'll explain that maybe a little later. But basically, what a consultant does is very different from, say, a kind of a design agency or a designer approach. Because what you do, as soon as you call yourself as a consultant, as soon as you say that, you're now not selling a commodity, you're selling ideas, you're selling frameworks, you're selling thinking, which is a more of a problem-solving approach than if you say, I sell a brochure design, or I sell web design, or whatever it might be. So initially, just by what you call yourself is important. In terms of how it works, though, is I tend to get up, I give a talk, people connect to my social media, they see me over time, and sometimes it can be 6 months, 8 months. But if they've got a problem in their leadership team that brand thinking can solve, I want to be number one in the box in their head to solve that problem. So I want to dominate that space as much as I can in my region. And now I've started to go a little bit outside the region. I'm doing work all over the world. So I would say start in your region, dominate it, like speak at business events if you've got that skill. Definitely get your awareness program up. Then when they come to approach you, it's almost like you don't have to do any hard work in a sense, because they already know that you are living and breathing this stuff. They've seen pictures of you on social media running, workshops with leadership teams. There's no question in their minds that you can do this. You've got to get that kind of trust, that kind of energy behind you. And it's hard work, guys. Like, I don't want you to think it's easy. Then once I get approached, usually it's not quite a structured approach to as yours, Jacob. So mine, because I don't have at the moment any overheads, right? I'm here in my house, right? And I have a laptop, a high-end laptop. I have, very little that I need. But basically I have my brain, my personality, and my beard. And those three things together, and my experience, I guess, those combined hopefully add huge value. But they won't add value to everybody, but only to people who need a particular person like me to come in and solve their problem. What's the problem that brand solves, or I solve, is really alignment issues in a leadership team. And I use brand to go in to help them all gel together to push the company to the next phase. So what I'm looking for, I look for CEOs who are looking to make a change, but for some reason they can't do it. And usually it's because there's this personality issue in their team, or maybe they just don't have the thinking, something's holding them back. So I might get approached by a CEO, for example, and then the sales process begins. So what does that look like? Well, often they'll say something like, they automatically jump to a deliverable, because people always do that. They always think, oh, I need this. So they'll say, oh, Matt, I need you to come and do a leadership team workshop, with us to figure out our brand, which is lovely. And, it's very nice always to be approached to do something like that, because that person's obviously agonized over the approach to someone like me for a while. They've had to literally sort of deal with, why can't we do this on our own? And then they've looked at me and thought, wow, this guy could help. So I don't take that lightly. But I also, like you were saying, Jacob, I don't want to offer something that doesn't really solve the problem. So what I do, maybe I need to think about this like paid discovery thing, but I'm maybe just I don't do that. I just sit down with them. Usually it's I either have a long call with them or have a coffee with them. Sometimes it's a number of email exchanges. Sometimes the process can take a month or two, because I don't like to jump into a working relationship unless I know I can add huge value. So what I do is I'm looking to establish in the early stages some very clear things. I want to understand, what is the objective of working with someone like me, right? So what's the end result? What does that even look like? What does success taste like? Some people have a very numbers-driven approach. Some people have, like, for example, I was doing some work with a global confectionery brand, and I was working with a leadership team within their bigger structure. So they're global. I was working with the UK team on one sort of division, and they had to fit their division into the wider sort of global strategy. And they were just really struggling, and they all had different views. So that's a sort of a very special, difficult, different approach to, say, a CEO who just wants to change to hit some more numbers for his board. So you just have to kind of understand, what are the objectives? What is the key results? How are we going to measure those results? And, why? So I like to ask why, like five times. Kenichi Toyoda approach. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's like this, the Japanese guy who basically started Toyota. And his approach was to ask why 5 times to get to the root cause of any particular issue or problem. So you've got to ask why. One other thing you want to ask is, two other things you want to ask is, what happens if we don't do this, right? What would happen if you don't get me in? What would you do? Like, and why me in the first place is another question. Like, what do you think I've got that would help you? Now, if I get answers to those questions like, well, we just liked, your beard or something, and there's nothing meaningful behind it, it's probably not a good fit. Like, I need someone to say, Matt, we need someone with your crazy personality, because, I need someone to go toe to toe, politely, positively, energetically with my team. And I don't really know anyone else like you who's offering what you're offering. Now we can talk, because now I'm like, right, I can add huge value here. There's no one else in the game. And it's really, really great. I know one thing I used to hate when I ran design agencies was, and I don't know if you ever get this, Jacob, but there's kind of invitation to tender, right? So it's like, oh, can you tender for our, materials over the next, year, or even just for a project? And so you're immediately commoditized, because you're immediately put against other people. Whereas if you do your awareness work correctly in this space, you can be the only one, only fish in the game, if that makes sense, the only fish in the pond. If they don't, they need you. So they want you. And that's as soon as I shifted to strategy and that started happening, like, I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. Because for my whole career, I was fighting against the competition. And now there was no competition. It was easy to do the sale. So I think I mean, I say easy, the hard work is done at the start, you know, so it's not actually easy, but it feels easier by the time you get to this point of having these conversations. So that's kind of how it works. Now, if we sort of going through that and we're building trust, like you were saying, like in your discovery thing, you build some trust. It then comes on to, okay, I don't want to do anything with them at this point. I'm just asking questions. But when they say, right, okay, so how do we move this on? How do we get you in, Matt? And that's where the conversation takes an interesting turn. So I always like to talk to who I call, well, I think, actually, I'm going to recommend a book, Alan Weiss, $1 Million Consultant, right? Alan Weiss is like the original guy who championed value-based billing. He championed consultancy approaches, which the principles of which are absolutely fantastic. So definitely check him out. We'll put a link in the blurb. But basically, he calls it the economic buyer, and I think that's absolutely best way of looking at it. I don't want to talk to a marketing manager who doesn't have the ability to sign off on a budget. I need to talk to the person who's got the money. So as soon as they start saying, right, well, that's great, mate. Like, how do we get you in? I then need to say, well, look, who's going to sign off on this budget? I need to talk to that person. And so I may have spent a month talking to one person, and they may be the wrong person. And then I might have to start all over again with a completely new person. But that's okay, because I don't put a proposal to the wrong person. It's a waste of time. It's an absolute waste of time. People don't buy consultants because, or, you know, strategists, because, you know, they see it on a piece of paper. They buy the energy and they buy the thinking and they buy the personality a lot of the time of the consultant. So that's the truth of it. People buy people. So I have to get in front of the right person who's going to buy me, if that makes sense. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. So I sit down with them. I do the whole thing. I get in front of the decision maker, the economic buyer. And then we move the conversation into what I call a conceptual agreement, which is basically, I say stuff like, so if I was to come along and run a series of workshops, which get you to the result that your whole leadership team globally is on board with a core purpose, a core audience that your brand wants to serve, would you say that that would be kind of success for the first phase of the project? And they might say, yeah, that sounds great. And I don't specify the amount of workshops, the amount of calls. I do not sell my time. So I think that's probably a good segue here to sort of talk a little bit about that. The great thing that strategy allows you to do is to break out of selling time. So I don't know if what your experience is with this is, Jacob, but definitely the way I was taught to do the business of design was to look at a project, you know, roughly work out how much time I could spend in each area, conceptualizing, presenting, meetings, project management, you know, artworking, delivering, or whatever it might be, and then figure out the time. And then I just create an hourly rate, like our hourly rate is £100 an hour or something. And that would become the value to the client. Is that something that you've come across before?
Well, I've always worked on a project basis, and it's about figuring out what their goals are, like you. So that is part of the discovery process, is to figure out how to get them from A to B, and that could be in a number of different ways. So to bring this back down to designers, because I know you're a pure strategist, I'm a bit of design and strategy. A lot of clients come to me for logo design or identity design, because that's really what I show in my portfolio. It's a lot of that type of work. So they'll come to me saying, I want a logo, and then we'll ask, why do you want a logo? Why do you want it from me, and why now? So similar questions. And that really leads me, excuse me, that leads me down to talking about strategy, because it's about, I start using metaphors, and like I talk about internal branding and external branding. And so you could use a car metaphor or iceberg, but iceberg goes pretty well because everything below the surface you can't see. So it's the internal aspects of the brand. So the why, the purpose, the vision, the core values, all of that sort of stuff. And then the logo is the tip of the iceberg, is what everyone sees. So if that's what you want, but to get there, we have to build it up. It's like a house. So you have to build a house on solid foundations, and yada yada. You get to see all the metaphors we can use. So this is a good way to. This is a good way to sell through strategy, to talk about things in other ways. So it's like a car. It's an engine. It gets you A to B. You're not going to get to B without a good engine. It's not just the veneer on the car. So it's not the paint job. So there's a whole ton of different metaphors you can use, and it works wonders. But yeah, like you said, the biggest thing is the goal question, because you can start to dive deeper to figure out what they're actually trying to do. I'm not doing culture or much leadership in my practice or agency, so it's really interesting to see your perspective there. But yeah, often we'll go through this discovery process, and we'll figure out actually what has to be done, and then draw up a proposal.
I guess where I was angling was, how do you place a value on a project then? Because how I used to do it, and it's not how I do it now, was I used to just work out how many hours it might take me or my team to deliver something, and then I'd give that hour like almost like the hour was a product. Like 1 hour is £100, right? And then I would basically package my end quote to reflect that. How do you do it then?
There's no exact science for any of this pricing. Now, I wish I did have a method to that, but it's generally price per project and per client. So figuring out what they need, and like I don't work on any of my hourly rates, because I know sometimes I can do a job in half a day, another time it could take a week or two. So I don't ever work out hours. That's me. I work fast sometimes, and sometimes it's a bigger problem. So.
I think you're probably ahead of the game there. I mean, maybe it was just me, and maybe it was just my school of upbringing in design. But yeah, I think I definitely agree with that, because one of the things that if you do approach it by the hourly rate, it used to infuriate me loads, because really it was kind of an immoral thing, really, because it was only the construct in the designer's head that it took 3 hours. The client didn't really care about that. The client wants the outcome of those 3 hours, and they don't actually care whether it took you 3 hours or 15 hours, as long as they get the end deliverable result. They don't care.
Yeah.
And so we are at a disadvantage as designers in regards to that, because on the one hand you've got you might have staff, you might have therefore you pay them usually by the hour. You might have overheads like your office or your studio. I had a lovely studio in the centre of Nottingham here in the UK. And that obviously cost me a set amount per month, which you could divide down into the hourly blocks. So you could work out, well, roughly per hour, I need to make X to be profitable, right? So it's kind of a natural thing, but it's completely only on the agency side. And so that's the problem. And so now I've done away with my overheads and my staff, and basically I'm just me. I haven't done away with my staff. That sounds like I've murdered them or something. They're all happily working elsewhere now. Some years on, I would say we're going back some years. But in terms of, I'm just talking about the shift for me. Now I'm on my own. I have the ability to work on a value-based sort of basis without the stress of worrying about any huge overheads. So what now tends to happen is I'm trying to work out how much the project is worth to the client, right? If they solve this problem, if they get their leadership team pointing in the same direction, if they get a clear understanding of their new brand, that they're going to kind of rise like a phoenix out of some problem that they've had in the past to reposition themselves, what value is that to them? What's their and why can't they do this right now? Like you were saying, and why now? So if it's huge value, then I might take it. Even if it's not monetary value, I might take the project if it's like a charity or something, and I think I can add value, and I think it would be a great project to work on. It doesn't always have to be money. It could be some other sort of interest that could connect you to it. But once you've reached some sort of conceptual agreement, we know where we want to go. We know the result that we're trying to get to. I don't want to specify all the stages. Like you were saying, like you could work really quick and get it done, or you could take it could take ages. I remember one time about 8 months ago, I was approached and by a company, and they were turning over about £5-6 million, and they wanted to take the company to the next level. And they were like, Matt, we think we need about, I think they said something like 6 workshops, and they literally like specified what they wanted to nail in each workshop. And that will get us to this result. And I said, okay, well, can we just focus on the result? If I can get you there within 3 months, I don't want to specify all these things. Are you just happy that I will focus on getting you there, and I'll give you weekly updates as to how we're going? And they said, yeah. So in the end, managed to do it in 2 workshops, plus a number of individual interviews with some of the leaders. So that then, otherwise I could have gone down this 8th thing. I could have dragged it out for them. It could have been really painful, but yeah, I would have hit what we agreed. But it doesn't give you enough chance if you specify everything to pivot. And so you need to kind of create an agreement whereby it's fair for both people. It allows you as a strategist to pivot and change as necessary, but it also gets them where they need to go by a set time usually. And so what I tend to do, how does that work, you might say? Because that's probably like really, it's quite difficult.
Yeah, so what do you put in your proposal?
So good point. So we get to the point where it's proposal. So I will then always outline the current situation, the objectives of the project, which we've already agreed. If I can, I will also include any details about the value, that they see in it. I then have a section on accountabilities. So what I will do and what they will do. And typically it looked like basically I ask for free reign, right? But I also usually, if it's the leadership team, and if it's particularly, I usually work, as I've said at the start, with a CEO, I will usually say to them, look, I will report into you, say, every 2 weeks or something, right? We'll have a scheduled call and I'll speak to you. I don't really want to talk to anyone else. I want to talk to the CEO. And I'll report in where we are, with your leadership team and how they're doing. And the way that it tends to work, similar to you, is I always put in a section called objectives. Let me just say it again. Options, not objectives. Options. So like you said, like you priced them a very cheap option, which still gets them where they want to go, but perhaps is like, for example, I might say, I will work with your marketing director, for example, and coach them over the 6 months to get you there, right? So I'm not actually, I call it like backstage, if you know what I mean. Like I literally will just have weekly or, whatever necessary, weekly calls with your marketing director, and then bi-weekly calls with you to let you know how we're doing. And I'll advise and steer from the sidelines. Another one might be, look, I will do a ton of work at the start. So I will set the direction. I'll do a load of workshops, and maybe I will, and we'll reach some sort of initial agreement on where we want to go. But then I will work with your team to deploy it. So in other words, like I might, it might have something in there around me working with the marketing director, for example, to appoint a design agency to help put flesh on the bones, or me working with the HR director to likewise create, have a design agency come and look at the employee brand or employer brand or something like that. But then the third option is like sky high, and it basically is like, I will come and join like your board basically for a period of time, and I will sit on your board, I will execute, you will give me a budget, I will basically do this for you and take responsibility and accountability for it. So that's insanely expensive for them. But and no one ever really goes for it. I'm just in conversations only just this week about a potential where that might happen. But what the options are designed to do, and I'm sure there's loads you could talk about this as well, because you're obviously doing it. But what they're designed to do is help people sort of see the value in the different stages of what they get out of you. And I might change those options. I might put different things in and move them around depending on the project and the problem. But what they allow people to do is benchmark. So if you just give one fee for one thing, like perhaps I might have done when I was sort of starting out, there's nowhere to go. Either you like that or you don't like that as a client. And so that's the end if they don't like it. No. if you give them 3 options, it's like, well, flip, that's really expensive. I'd love to get Matt to come and do that, but it's too expensive. What's the next option down? That one. Okay, it still gets me where I want to go. I think that's a good deal. Let's do that. And so they're benchmarking against you. Whereas if you just put one fee, maybe then they'll get other fees, and you're then being compared to other proposals, rather than comparing them to just 3 options that you could deliver. I think that's it in a nutshell. What are your thoughts?
On top of that, I also only have one price for each package. I don't ever split line items for anything. So, so say the first package is logo identity design. That's all as one package. It's not split logo design and then style guide and then so forth. Or the next package up could be the strategy. It's everything. It's either take it or leave it. And then the next one up can use whatever we found in the discovery process, the social media strategy, website, or whatever it may be, is all in that package. So it's just packages. It's not ever broken down. Websites sometimes, because they're bigger projects, they're kind of just estimated, and then we'll have another discussion about it. But generally, that's how I keep the packages simple, and it leaves no room for negotiation or removing things. So like I want to take this out, or cherry picking, I should say. So that's a good method to use to help sell through proposals and avoid any back and forth.
Yeah, definitely. I think because I'm literally just playing in the strategy space, it's funny to hear you talk, because I tend to any project that I tend to work on that has design as a kind of the end bit, I tend to be the advisor, the trusted advisor, or the creative director, you could call it, art director, influence in that. But then what I would tend to do is connect my clients with other agencies who I know are great in a particular space, or other designers like yourself who I know would be perfect for that particular project. And so that's also the value that I would bring. But then I would go out to them, and often they will be quoting, line by line, item by item. And then I'd be the guy, like you were saying, that would just be like, can we take that out and put that in, or whatever? And I'd be the one. But you're right. There's no need. As long as you've got a very clear objective, like where do we want to get to at the end of it, everyone should just trust kind of that we're going to head for that. And there should be I agree, a fixed fee, a project fee. Then we can all budget towards it. The challenge comes, I think, when you've got bigger agencies and they've got bigger overheads and staff, and the setup of that becomes a challenge. And I was never able, being completely honest, to solve that as a business owner in the design studio. And I ran another marketing agency, a digital marketing agency, and we also struggled with that, a much bigger one. So it's kind of, if anyone's got any answers to this, it would be great. It would be great. But I don't know if there is a clear answer to it, unless you move over to the sort of the model that I'm on and that Jacob's on, which is a lot more sort of nimble, I guess, to it. But maybe there are some answers. I just haven't found them yet.
Me either. So yeah, I think it's a pretty thorough episode. I hope you have come to realize how to sell strategy in some different ways, and three different options from me: the original questionnaire option, and then the email discovery or email call, and then the retainer method from you, or a long burn method, as well as other tips and tricks. So if you have other questions, please do let us know. I'm not sure if you had anything else to add, Matt.
Yeah, just very, very briefly, one thing I probably didn't explain is what goes into the retainers. Can I come back on that?
I kept mentioning it, and then you never spoke about it.
Yeah, sorry. So we could maybe cut this bit out and put it a bit earlier. So just to finish up then on the retainers, Jacob, one of the things that I think is good to put in, at least from a strategy perspective, is you can work towards an end goal over literally some of the strategy work I'm working on might be 6 months, right? So one of the projects, for example, at the moment that I've got is there is a big hairy goal at the end of the 6 months. And then there's 3 checkpoints, which we've roughly agreed. So one is to create a culture strategy. One is to create the leadership strategy. And then the other is the brand strategy, which is, there's 3 little things there, and I define that in the proposal. And then I say, look, I've got a fixed fee per month of X, which you pay me monthly. And then all I do is I work towards those 3 mini objectives, which lead up to the one big kind of hairy objective. And I will give you a call every 2 weeks with the CEO. So it's fixed. So they know what they're getting with me. If there's any problems, if I negate on any of my accountabilities, then they have, they can can it, and vice versa. If they don't do that to me, then we can can it. But ultimately, a lot of people, once they start working with you as an individual, and if you've positioned yourself right, they want you, and it's not so much you trying to sell to them. And so it's a very different kind of kettle of fish, perhaps, to just being looked at as a commodity. So that would be kind of my parting message, really, is to look at yourself as a key part of delivering a brand strategy, not as like the guy at the end who's just polishing the car, as you sort of alluded to in your kind of what do you call it, metaphors. So that's all I'd say. So yeah,
basically, to summarize, it's about outlining goals and objectives and showing what results you're going to give them. That's it in a nutshell. And to actually facilitate or understand what their goals are, you need to guide them through this process, talk to them and listen. That's the biggest part, and knowing the questions to ask. So once you learn that, you can sell strategy and get them to where they need to be.
Definitely. I think that's brilliant. Great summary. So thanks very much, folks. That's it from me and Jacob.
Thanks, guys. See you next episode.